Hello Internet, welcome to another tutorial on Angular, and in this video we have a very interesting concept of Angular, which is Angular services. So knowing what is Angular services is the topic of the beginner level. It is a fundamental concept of Angular, and if you want to know Angular architecture and want to know how exactly the obtaining of a data from a backend works in Angular, how you establish a communication between different components in Angular, how basically the data passing or the information, whatever you call it, data, information, messages passing. If you are keen to know how the components, how the UI elements that you see on the websites, how they communicate with each other. So this is a topic, Angular services, which will answer all the questions related to that. Technical topics that is actually influenced by the real world things, and it applies to the most of the things. So similar goes with a service. So if you want to relate a service with some real world example, it's like a set of tools that a carpenter can have, and if you just try to think about what this tool exactly does, so you can like think of each of this tool has an individual functionality, and they are designed for serving some certain purpose or some to work in a certain way or to give you to help you accomplish a particular thing. So all of them have its characteristics, and they are intended to you can relate the Angular services as like a specialized tool that perform only certain specific set of tasks. What are the good design patterns? What are the concepts from programming, object-oriented programming it helps us to achieve? So that was one naive example. So let's try to understand now theoretically, and this time with the actual uh, implementation and the Angular framework with the technical concepts. So, and that's what I am trying to show here in this diagram, that you have the components, and components are the building blocks of an Angular project. They represent smallest to smallest decomposable unit of your application, like the navbar, like any widgets, like a set of buttons, like a header, footer, anything basically that you can decompose in your UI. So these components which are part of your application, they need to communicate with each other. They need to pass a data, and sometimes they need to pick a data from a single source, or it can be some logic to process that data. For example, if you get a certain data and then you want to mold that data, you want to transform it in a certain way before you want to render it on the UI. So all those tasks basically can be accomplished with a service. Here service is helping in a specific task, but also it is enabling a one more concept, enabling one more benefit, which is the reusability. You can see these multiple components are reusing the same thing, same set of code, and that we wrote only once. Now the question is, if we are using a services, then in order to make the services available to all the components, we must need to do something different or something special, and that's where the concept of injection comes into a picture. I have a separate in detail video about the dependency injection, where I talk about what is a dependency injection in first place, how it works, what is the need of a dependency injection in Angular, and what are the benefits that we get with it. So I recommend you do watch the dependency injection video for the same. But since we are talking about the services, and services is utilizing the injection or the dependency injection mechanism, I would explain that in a brief. If you have to make any service available to components, what you need to do is you need to inject that service into a component. And what happens with the injection is that internally Angular creates only one instance of that service, and that instance of a service, you can call it an instance or an object, which is of the service type, and that object is basically only one object is created in your runtime memory, and that object is shared across multiple components. So this is a good example of the singleton pattern, where we create only one instance of object from a class. Another example of it is that if you have to establish a database connection and you want to avoid the concurrency, you want to make the database operation in a linear way. At a time, only one process or one thread will do a read-write operation on a database. Or you want to avoid a race condition where two different processes would update a similar data on a similar memory location. If you want to avoid that, many times what we do in the as a programming pattern is we make a singleton pattern implementation, where we create only one instance of class or any entity, and that entity or that single entity would be shared across all. Picture is hero service is a one instance of a service, hero service, that has been injected. And how we inject that, like in the component we create inside a constructor, we create a reference of that that object, and then we can use it. In the first example, we understood what services enables us to do, and in this second diagram we understood that how it allows us to do and reusability, and that is through the way of injection mechanism or dependency injection. Now let's jump to the VS Code, and I want to show you example. So I have just created a simple Angular application, and I want to show one simple weather widget where what I'm trying to do is based on the IP address, internet protocol address of a user. I will decide the location of user, and depending on that location, I want to fetch the real-time weather information like the temperature, how much is the wind speed, all those things I want to fetch. For that, I would use a public API. So let me create a component for that. I am using this extension where it is very easy to create the Angular entities like the component directory module. So I will create a component here. Let's call it weather widget. Next thing I want to use that, I want to refer that selector in my app component HTML. So simply copy it, control space, hit enter, and now it's added. Okay, so what I want to do is in this weather widget component, I want to show you a simple widget where I can show the weather details of my location. So for that, I'm going to create a simple UI, and I will just add this text here below are the weather details, simple BR tags, and I want to show the weather details that I will get in a JSON format. Now I need to define this weather detail somewhere. This is a variable which is going to store my data. So for that, I want to use open source API, and to make a call to that open source API, I will need HTTP client. I will create that variable object weather details, and now I need to create an HTTP clients instance reference. So this is the dependency injection concept which I was talking about in my slide. If you want to inject anything in any component, you need to create a reference of it. So in this example, the HTTP client is basically coming from the Angular common HTTP. Use the HTTP client in any n number of components. There is no limitation that you know can have to use in a specific components only. There can be endless cases. So practically I cannot create n instances of a HTTP client always. So to avoid that mess, what Angular provides us is a dependency injection as a solution, which is a design pattern also, where only one instance is created. So once I have this instance, I am using a weatherstack.com. This is an API that I'm using to get the details about the weather. Of course, you need to generate a weather's API key. So if you go to weatherstack.com documentation, you will find the details about what are the supported APIs that you can use. So it's completely free, and you can generate the API keys. If you go to the this screen where you have an option account, and you have to create account, and if you go to a dashboard, you can see your API access key that basically you need to use in your API. So you can see that the same key I'm using as a query parameter access key which I provided, and the current. So after having this, let's see if my UI is showing something or not. So if I go to the localhost and do a refresh, uh, I can see that there is an error which says that a null injector error, which basically means that the HTTP client which I injected in my component, that is not injected properly, that is not being instantiated here properly. And that is for the obvious reason that whenever you want to inject anything, any dependency or any service, you need to have a provider for that. Add that provider in our module, app module file. So if I just import the HTTP client from the HTTP common HTTP Angular common HTTP, then what happening here is the module is in imports, and with this module there is a HTTP client also which is provided. So now if I go to browser and see, I don't have that error now, and if I just do a refresh, I still don't have a data. Let me see what's going wrong. So it seems the API call is not happening. Did I made some mistake? Yeah, so I did not wrote a complete code. I need to subscribe to this APIs whenever we are making any asynchronous request. So in this case, we are fetching a data. We are making a GET request to a data source which is outside of our application. we need to subscribe to that. I will add a subscribe and the response as an arrow function, and that response I want to assign to my weather details. And the weather details, I am using a pipe of JSON so that it will look in a JSON format. And now you can see the data. My current location is Pune, and I can see the various details about my location, like the local time, the time zone, and the other weather parameters like the pressure, precip, humidity are being received from the API. Okay, so I want to go a step ahead and want to add some more CSS so that the thing that we are seeing here, it will look more nicer. So what I will do is I will create a new component, and what I want to do is inside that component I want to show the details of this weather in a card view. So the things that I'm getting from this response, the location current, I will pass it as an input, and I will do a few more changes in that component. First thing, I will add the input location and the current using the input decorator, and then in the HTML I will create a card using Angular material. I have set up the Angular material in this project. If you want to know how to set up it, I have a different detailed tutorial on it where I have explained how you can set up the Angular material library in your Angular project. So I will add a code for the mat card header and other things, and the input that I received, which was the current and the location, that I will show here in this card. I also want to show one more field here, which is the last updated time. And in the CSS I want to apply my own CSS where I want to set the background color. I want to show it in the center. There are errors as I can see that are related to mat card head and other elements that Angular is not able to recognize, and that are because of I need to import the materials module in my app module. Usually we keep a separate file for this, but since we have a very small application, for the sake of this demonstration of the concept, I'll put them here in my app module. I also want to add this component in the declaration so that Angular is able to identify it. Now after having these changes, let me go to my plus 42, and there are still some things not identified. What I will do is recompile the project again. Sometimes it happens that you do a changes and your Angular CLI is not able to detect that changes. I have observed it is a known bug of Angular CLI that if you create a new component and basically the code is correct, but it's not able to detect the new files there. Sometimes it happens, so you need to recompile it. So after having that, I can see I am able to show the things which I have from the JSON in the uh, this time with some CSS, and the look and feel is good. So my intention is not to enhance or improve this design. The approach that we followed now is approach where what we did is we simply use the HTTP client, and using that HTTP client I fetched the data from the weatherstack.com, which is other data provided, the diagram that I was showing here, where you have one data provider publisher from where you can get the data. Now imagine that this thing I am using only in one component, I have only one widget, but what if I have to make that widget to be reusable, or what if I have to use this service again and again, and this logic of fetching the data and want to render it in a proper way like I'm doing here. If what if I want to do that multiple times? You can understand that if I have a scenario where I want to get a data from a single source but want to make it available across application, or some piece of element I want to make it across application, I need to do something different. And there are several ways. Actually what I can do is I can make this entire component what I already have put it in the card, and that card I will use again. So if I want to do that, what I can do is this app with the widgets I can do refer multiple times in the multiple modules. But the problem and the overhead with this approach is that whenever we are going to add this lines of selector in our code, it basically will invoke this instruction, this code to fetch the details from this, make this API calls multiple times, which additionally adds, which basically adds a computation which we don't want. So just for this, if I have this many widgets here, and now if I go to my browser and do a refresh, what I can observe is I have four API calls I have made to the app with the stack API to show the same things. And this is not an efficient approach. Imagine if you have a widget which you want to show multiple times on your application, how much performance overhead it's going to cause. So this is not a recommended. So solution to this is a services. So now we'll try to implement the same thing, and now this time we'll use a service. First thing what I will do is I will create a service. You can use a command ng generate service, which is something like this: generate service and you can provide the module which you want to use like this, and the name, in our case we have only one module like app module. You can do it in this way using Angular CLI. So I'll right click here, generate service. Let's call this weather service. I will hit enter, and you can see the things that it changed. It created two files. One is spec file, which is for the test cases, which I don't need in our case, and another is a service, and it had made the entry in our app component, which must be the weather service. If it has not made, we need to do that. Like we need to import this service and we need to add it in our riders array. So what I can do is simply copy here and use the IntelliSense to auto complete this thing. And now with this, my service, weather service, will be available across the application. Let me change this service since it will automatically attach the service to whatever name you give. So I'll just change that to only weather service from here. And now the code that I wrote in the component for in my weather widgets component to get these details, I will shift that from component to the weather widget service, and I will create a function for the same, which is public, which doesn't need any input in this case at least, and I will return this response back to, and let me add a I need to add the return type any, and I will need to create the instead of this HTTP client in the constructor of the component, I need to do the same thing here in the service. I will add the import, which is same like this in the service, and now I don't need this thing, and I don't need a subscribe here. I will subscribe that in my component instead of the service. So with this, I think I need to shift this. Oh, I missed one curly bracket, so it is correct. Let me format this. Prettier is my favorite formatter. I use it in all of my project. By the way, the source code is available on the GitHub, and the description in the description you will find the link of the repository where you can check the code. Now, after creating this service, you can see that there is an annotation which is added here, which says that decorator that marks a class as available to be provided and injected as a dependency. So this is what I was talking about. We make the services injectable, and inject dependency injection is a concept, and how we do that is through the means of injectable decorator. If we add that injectable at the top of any class, and you understand that this is a service which is injectable and it can be used across the component. Now what I will do is this injected service, I will create a reference of this in my component. So same thing I will do here. I will create a private service reference, let me call this, and would do weather service, it will be of type weather service. Weather service is automatically imported, and now with this weather service in my ng on it, what I do is I will do this dot get weather details, and I'll subscribe to this, and the arrow function inside it similarly like the previous, it should be small r response, and like this dot weather details equals to response, and it must be having need to be in the parenthesis, and that also needs a data type in the TypeScript. So there we go. We have moved the code that was for fetching the weather details from the component to the service, and now I'm okay to use it. And let me see if it is working, and I can see that with these changes I'm able to get the things. So my application is intact. So now question is, what benefit we achieved? So if you see in the overall structure of our project, we now can use a code for fetching weather details, and that is present in the weather service. And now if I want to use it in the other components, I don't no longer have the dependency on any specific component, or I don't have to repeat the code. I can just create like I just can create a reference of the service which is already injected, and then can use this get, and I can use the get weather details method of the service directly in any component. So these are the main characteristics that services provides to us. We'll go through each one by one. By the way, this is the emphasization formatting that I just recently got to know about. If you put the sentences with the initials of the words in bold, it becomes it's a psychological tricks where our brain is able to read them fast. So compared to this paragraph, this section on the right, you will be able to read this faster, more faster, because we have used this emphasis. So coming back, so reusability with the services in Angular are designed to reusable the components and the modules, so we can reduce the duplicate code, and with that we can improve the maintainability of application. Dependency injection, as I was talking about, Angular services often used with the dependency injection, which allows the components to access throughout the application, directly creating the instances of them. It helps us to decouple the components from each other and making it very easy to modify the components. You don't have like a dependency on the logic inside the component. Now you have taken out the logic or the business logic in your project, whatever you have completely taken out that, and the responsibility of your component is just to render the UI, to show the UI. Singleton, by default, Angular services are created as singletons, meaning that there is only one instance of service throughout application, and this helps us in the improving the performance and reduce the memory usage. Separation of concern, services in Angular are designed to handle specific tasks. This is what we started our tutorial with, that services that basically serves a specific task. So anything which is like a specific purpose, in our case the purpose was to get weather details and show. So those set of tasks you can accomplish with the services, like getting a data from server or handling user authentication. This helps to keep a code organized and make it easy to maintain and debug application. Asynchronous app operations is something we're going to learn in coming tutorials. I will talk about the reactive extension JavaScript RxJS library, which through which we'll understand how the asynchronous code and asynchronous operations are handled. So with the help of services, making the asynchronous call like the HTTP request to a server, handling a long running task in the background, that becomes easy, and we can keep our UI completely separated. It's completely loosely coupled here, where the logic will completely reside in the services, and the part where you want to show UI will with view on the page will be with a component only. With that, I'm wrapping up this session, and I hope you may find this helpful. If you have any questions, do let me know them in the comment section. I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thank you. Keep learning, keep growing.